Chapter 13. Miss Adolph was on the prowl. She was hungry for paper. "Please take your essays out, class," she said. "I hope you remembered to staple them in the upper left-hand corner." She walked up and down the aisles, clutching her roll book close to her chest. When she stopped at my desk, I could feel her hot breath on my head. "Your desk appears to be empty, Mr. Zipser," she said. My heart was pounding. This was the moment. "I thought we agreed you were to read your composition first," she snapped. "And I am completely, totally prepared, Miss Adolph," I said. I looked at Frankie. I gave him a nod. He gave Ashley a nod. The three of us stood and went to our planned positions. Ashley took the saran-wrap tube and attached it with tape to the faucet at the cleanup sink. Frankie and I disappeared into the hall. "Excuse me," Miss Adolph shouted. I think she was starting to get angry. I stuck my head back into the classroom and said, "Get ready for creativity like you've never seen before." Out in the hall, we got my costume out of the paper bag. Frankie held the yellow raincoat for me to slip into, and I pulled on the boots and the fisherman's hat. Then we picked up the project and walked it into the classroom, where we placed it on the sink counter. "Exactly what do you think you're doing?" Miss Adolph demanded to know. "What you're about to see, Miss Adolph, is what I did on my summer vacation, my living essay." The kids moved closer so they could see. Ryan Shimizoto even stood up on his chair. Katie Sperling and Kim Paulson were whispering to each other and giggling. I noticed that Nick McKelty kept looking at the door to the classroom like he was expecting someone. Before Miss Adolph could object again, I began. "Niagara Falls was formed 12,000 years ago, but when I visited this summer, it didn't look a day over 11,000. It did, however, look wet, really wet." That was Ashley's cue. She turned on the faucet at the sink. With a quick twist of the nozzle, the water started to run through our hose and into the hole at the top of the papier-mâché cliff. I was so excited I couldn't continue. The falls were actually doing what they were supposed to do, falling. The water hitting the bottom of the turkey pan sounded like rain. Ashley turned on the fish pump, and it started to bubble, moving the water from the bottom of the turkey pan back up to the top of the falls. The boat at the bottom of the pan rose in the water. It was floating. Everything was working. 750,000 gallons of water flow over these falls every second, I say. Old Robert had finally come in handy. "Do you see that boat?" I asked, pointing to the Lego people in it. "Picture my mother, my father, my sister, and me, dressed as I am now, covered with mist." At that moment, Frankie turned on the fan, and a little of the water started to blow toward my raincoat. The kids gasped. "Awesome," said Ryan Shimizoto. "Truly awesome," said Justin, Ricky, and Gerald. They're Ryan's crew, and they like whatever he likes. "Half the falls are in Canada, and the other half are in the United States, making Niagara Falls a link between our two countries," I went on. I remember the tour guide had said that while we were waiting in line to get on the boat. I was on a roll. There were so many facts I knew about Niagara Falls, I could have gone on until lunch or longer. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw that Frankie was trying to get my attention. I glanced over at him. He whispered something, but I couldn't quite understand him. It sounded like "no peeking." I didn't know what he was talking about. I shrugged and went on. "We left New York City on a muggy August morning," I said, pretending to be driving in a car. "My mother said it was so hot you could fry eggs on her knees." The kids laughed. They were loving this. I really felt wonderful and successful. Maybe I'll be a stand-up comedian when I grow up, I thought. Take this show on the road. I looked at Frankie. He wasn't laughing. Why not? Whatever he had been trying to say to me, he said again. No peeking? Was that it? I still couldn't understand him. He sure was flapping his arms around a lot. Just then, the door swung open. In walked Leland Loved. Wow, this was great. The principal was coming to see my project, just like I had hoped. "Tourists from all over the world come to see Niagara Falls," I said. I was getting more and more confident by the minute. "A couple from Italy asked me to take their picture with the falls in the background," I added. I hadn't even planned to tell that part of the story. It just sort of came out. Suddenly, Frankie walked in front of me and with an Italian accent said, "I think of these falls are better than SpaghettiOs." The class howled. "SpaghettiOs rule," laughed Luke Whitman. "SpaghettiOs for Gettios." It doesn't take much for Luke to get out of control. "What are you doing?" I whispered to Frankie. "You weren't supposed to talk." "I've been trying to tell you," Frankie whispered. "We're leaking. Look." I looked over at the hose. Oh no, this wasn't happening. The cardboard was soaking wet. The tube was turning to mush, and the last piece of tape holding the hose to the cliffs was coming loose. I yelled for Ashley to turn off the water. She ran to the sink, but she was so nervous she turned the water on full force instead, which totally blew the hose off the project. Water sprayed everywhere, but mostly on Ms. Adolph. She opened her mouth to speak and got a mouthful of falls. The hose started to spin around, and the kids all ran for cover, laughing and shouting. Ms. Adolph was so stunned she just stood there. Bam! She got pelted again with a blast of water. When she put her hands up to her face to block the water, her roll book fell to the floor. It landed in a puddle of water. She gasped and tried to reach for it, but Luke Whitman was running wild and stomped on it, pushing it completely underwater. Ms. Adolph stared at her roll book. The paper was absorbing water fast and turning into a soggy mess. She opened her mouth wide like she was going to scream really loudly, but all that came out of it was a mouse-like eek. Bam! The hose came around again and hit her with another shot of water. She was really wet now. It looked like she had just stepped out of the shower with her clothes on. The pile of gray hair that was always neatly pinned on top of her head fell down and looked like a horse's tail. "The water!" Principal Leland yelled. "Someone turn off the water!" The kids were all laughing pretty hard, so no one moved toward the sink. Principal Love bolted across the room. He had to push by Luke Whitman, who was leading a bunch of kids in a rain dance. There was so much water on the floor, the classroom looked like a pond. Pencils, crayons, Miss Adolph's roll book, and even a tuna fish sandwich in a baggie floated by. Principal Love sloshed over to the sink. As he reached the counter, he stepped on the baggie. It exploded, and the tuna sandwich squished out from under his shoe. It was a slippery mess. Principal Love went sliding on the sandwich like he was on water skis. The last thing I saw before he went swimming was his hand reaching for the counter with the turkey pan on it. As the pan tipped, the papier-mâché flew, and the muddy, mushy Niagara Falls landed with a splat all over Mr. Love's face. I didn't mean to laugh, but I couldn't stop. In fact, I was laughing so hard that I fell tush first into the water. Then what do I see but Nick McKelty's hand reaching out to Mr. Love. "Don't worry, sir," he said. "I'll save you." Sometimes I think things happen the way they're supposed to, because Nick McKelty, suck-up of the century, slipped too and went flying head-first into the muck. When he came up for air, he looked like he had a papier-mâché chicken sitting on his head. He wiped off his face and leaned over to Principal Love. "Didn't I tell you Zipzer was about to launch a disaster?" he said. Oh, so that's why Principal Love came to class. McKelty, that rat, told him to come see me make a fool of myself. And stupid me thought it was because he heard I had a great project. Principal Love didn't say a word. All he did was wag a finger at me. I knew what that meant. "I'll see you in my office. Now."